General, Karen Hogan, nice to see you again, back before us again, the Auditor General of Canada, Gabrielle Lombardi, Principal, and Eva Jarzina, Director. Nice to see you as well. From the Department of Employment and Social Development, Paul Thompson, Deputy Minister, thank you for coming in today, along with your colleague, Catherine Adams, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Income Security and Social Development. I believe you'll each have 5 minutes or approximately 5 minutes opening statement. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor to kick us off, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de nous donner l'occasion de...
I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity for appearing today to discuss our report on the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, which was tabled on October 21st. First of all, I would like to say that we acknowledge the fact that we are on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. In our audit, we examined whether or not ESDC met its responsibilities with respect to child care and early learning. The government committed to sending $36 million to the provinces, territories, and to the Indigenous partners to support the creation of high-quality, affordable, inclusive, and flexible spaces in the service of the early learning and childcare system. During the first years of the agreement, the provinces and territories spent $12 billion of the $15 billion that were sent to them.
Parents' out-of-pocket fees for federally funded spaces had been reduced to an average of $16.50 a day. The target is to reach an average of $10 per day by March 2026. Federal funding also supported the creation of approximately 112,000 new child care spaces as of March 2024. However, with time running out, there is a risk that the goal of creating 250,000 new spaces by 2026 will not be met. The audit found that the department lacked information to track whether federal funding had met the objectives of supporting diverse and vulnerable children and families and supporting Indigenous early learning and childcare initiatives. For example, the department could not report about progress achieved on initiatives for Indigenous early learning and childcare, such as facility renovations or repairs. While childcare costs to parents have been reduced, Employment and Social Development Canada's monitoring is not sufficient to know whether families' needs are being met. The department needs to collect consistent and comparable data across the country to track the program's overall performance, inform future decisions, and support families across Canada. Monitoring is also essential to assess the financial sustainability of the Canada-wide system going forward. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
I just realized I
closed chat.
Thank
you very much. And now, Mr. Thompson, if you have an opening statement, approximately 5 minutes, and whatever you need. Thank you.
Very good. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me to speak today.
Start by commending the Auditor General and her team for a thorough and thoughtful analysis of the early learning and childcare program in Canada. The report appropriately captures some of the progress achieved through the early learning childcare system and accurately reflects a number of the challenges that we've had in rolling the program out, and in so doing makes some very important recommendations. I want to assure the committee that my department is already working to address and implement the recommendations in the report. La mise sur pied d'un système d'apprentissage.
The setting up of a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system is a vision that is for all families to have access to high-quality, affordable, flexible, and inclusive early learning and childcare no matter where they live. In its report, the Auditor General found that families are seeing improvement in affordability. They found also that all provincial and territorial governments had reduced average out-of-pocket fees by 50% by December 22 for regulated spaces, part of the Canada-wide program.
24, 5 provinces and 3 territories reported achieving an average fee of $10 per day. This brought the average fees paid throughout Canada for full-time childcare to approximately $16.50. However, the report also found that the target to create 250,000 new early learning and childcare spaces by March 2026 was at risk. The deadline for space creation target is, as stated, next year, and we continue to work with our provincial and territorial partners to achieve it. When the Government of Canada announced its intention to create an early learning and childcare system in 2021, it was clear that there were 2 issues at the forefront: affordability and access. Comme l'indique le rapport de la vérification.
As reflected in the Auditor General's report, our work with provinces and territories has already resulted in significant savings for families across the country, but increasing capacity through space creation has been moving at a slower pace.
Is that unlike fee reductions, which is a question of providing funding, the creation of spaces takes greater time. It involves complex multi-year projects, the development and support of the workforce. That is why, in many cases, provincial and territorial action plans reflect a more gradual ramping up of the space creation goals, having first addressed some issues of affordability. The space creation goals are more heavily weighted in the last 2 years of the agreements. The Auditor General also identified that ESDC's reporting has not been timely, in part due to the necessity to both receive and review the information from our partners. Openness, transparency, and accountability are guiding principles, and as Deputy Minister, I agree with the AG that proper data collection and reporting on the system is vital to ensuring that the program remains responsive to evolving needs. There's no question that more work is needed to improve our reporting practices, which is why we are in constant dialogue with our partners to strengthen and better communicate the progress. As an example, we have been co-developing results frameworks with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners to improve how we measure collective outcomes for Indigenous early learning and childcare. Furthermore, in March 2024, the Canada Early Learn Childcare Act received royal assent. This legislation includes a requirement that the Minister deliver annual reports to Parliament on federal investments and the progress being made under a Canada-wide system. With that, I would again like to thank the Auditor General and her office for the report and the recommendations, which is helping us guide the work forward on improving Canada-wide early learning and childcare.
Thank you both very much. We'll now begin with our first round, which will consist of 3 members, 6 minutes each. Ms. Goodridge, nice to see you here today. You will kick us off, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Ms. Goodridge, I'll let you know as a guest, when your time expires, if the witnesses are still answering the question, I do let them finish. You just can't interrupt them once your time has expired, but you will have your full 6 minutes and a few extras if you time it wisely. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. This is a very important topic, and I think that this is something that a lot of families have benefited from. So in your report, Ms. Hogan, you highlighted the fact that there was a risk of not getting the space creation. Are you confident, based on the information you were able to assess, that all of the spaces that were created were net new spaces?
Mm-hmm. So, that was a challenge, and that's why we talk about it being a risk, that the target of 250,000 new spaces won't be met. The federal government just has the information that's provided to it by provinces and territories, and there isn't clear parameters on exactly what to report back. There could be some that are not net new. There could be some that are created that just not used or taken up because there isn't staff for those spaces to be created. And I think this speaks to one of our key recommendations is why better gathering of data to be able to compare across the country, apples to apples, is definitely needed. But when we look at how many spaces were created in year 3, while I recognize it's likely going to be back-end loaded, there's a lot of work left to be done.
Well, I know in my province of Alberta, there were day homes, and a lot of them were unregulated. And so basically, we created regulated spaces, which an unregulated day home could have 5 kids, a regulated day home can have 6. So that's a creation of one space. But I believe in this agreement, and perhaps Mr. Thompson, you could give us some information on this. Did that count as 6 spaces or 1 space in a situation like that?
Catherine, do you want to?
So if, in that case of a private home care provider, if they moved into the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system and added a new space, I believe that would be counted as 6 new spaces created because they're coming into the Canada-wide system. And by that, they're then abiding by the guidelines that the province has agreed to around affordability.
So then, Ms. Hogan, I guess this opens up a big question of like, if that's the case, that there were already 5 spaces, and by moving them from one system into another system, now they count them as 6 new spaces, but technically there were 5 spaces. Is that not like really funky math?
So I think it's important to step back and say, childcare is regulated by the provinces, and then there is unregulated spaces and regulated spaces. And all the federal government can gain access to is information on regulated spaces. And so there are certain rules, and you're going to have certain rigor and improving quality. And the goal of this program was to increase affordable quality, flexible spaces. And so, yes, it would be bringing in new spaces. I agree if I was a parent, I would say, well, there isn't 6 new spaces there, right? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of being able to show whether or not this funding is really meeting the net objective of creating 50,000 new spaces, right?
So then my next question is, in your report, you talked about the fact that there were provinces that were using school-aged kids. Can you elaborate on which province or provinces were using school-aged children as part of their counts?
So there was, we mentioned that about one province. I believe it was the province of Saskatchewan. And I think in this case, what they were told was the space is occupied by someone over the age of 6, but eventually when that person is no longer in that space, we'll redirect it. But this is why you need to set out the parameters with provinces and territories at the outset. What are we going to count? What are we all going to agree is a new space under this program, so that you're reporting accurate and comparable information nationally?
Well, and I think that's so critically important. And I'm a parent of 2 young kids. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and we rely on childcare. And I think a lot of parents feel completely gaslit because they have access to wait lists. They don't actually have access to childcare in so many provinces across this country. And the federal government goes out and says, this is such a huge success. We've done such an amazing job. We've created all these spaces. And they're sitting there going, no, this day home that I used to go to, it's just now regulated, and so there's one more space. That's not 6 new spaces. That's 1 new space. And when we hear things like some provinces are using that because the information from the federal government wasn't clear, well, perhaps this was a case where the federal government should have left provincial jurisdiction alone and worked with provinces to create a program rather than imposing a program on a province. But that's just my little soapbox that I'll get off of. So my question on the Saskatchewan piece, how many students were counted in that?
So I'm going to have to see if someone can give us that level of detail. I think the only comment I would make as they're searching for that information would be that the agreement to develop the Canada-wide early learning was a collaborative agreement. So provinces and territories contributed to what the 5 goals would be. And one of the conditions of accessing funding federally would be to provide information. And all I can point out is that the federal government should have set themselves up better to get comparable and consistent information. So I'm just going to see if someone can give you that answer.
I want to do one more quick question on this. Are we also counting how many spaces closed as a result of this? Are we tracking any of that?
And Ms. Goodrich's time is up. I will let you answer both those questions if you like. Thank you.
You're not on.
Oh, I have to press it myself?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the question. So very briefly, it comes down to the wording in the agreements, and some agreements specified that the space creation targets were net new, and some did not specify. So the measurement of what was reported against those objectives can kind of be a mixed bag of things. And for the Saskatchewan example, it was an estimated number of spaces because about a quarter of the family home spaces in Saskatchewan are for school-age children. So that shouldn't have been counted depending on how you define the parameters of new space creation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next is Mr. Osborne. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in full disclosure, I will say that I was the Minister of Education in Newfoundland and Labrador when we signed the agreement and started on this process. So I will say that there is a huge benefit to transferring unregulated spaces to regulated. If they're unregulated, we can't measure the quality. And we had a huge concern in Newfoundland and Labrador, not with all unregulated. Some of them were fantastic operations and did a great job, but some of the unregulated did not. So to transfer a space from unregulated to regulated, I think deserves some merit in counting that, because now you can, you know the quality. There's a set of criteria they must follow. I'm just wondering if Ms. Adam or Mr. Thompson want to speak to that for a moment.
Start out. It was indeed our objective to expand the regulated childcare space as an assurance of quality, that the province has a degree of oversight in terms of the quality of the care being provided. And that, when we went into the program, we had a benchmark of approximately 908,000 existing regulated spaces across the country, and that was the mark from which we were trying to grow by 250,000 regulated spaces. It could indeed be the case that there's spaces converting from non-regulated, but similarly, we're not tracking the growth of the non-regulated space either, so it's possible that they've been backfilled by other non-regulated spaces as well. The program here is an investment to grow the regulated space with the greater degree of quality assurance. I don't know if Catherine wants to add anything to that. You're good?
Nope, I think that's great.
So I guess the second point that I will make is, I know in Newfoundland and Labrador, when we transferred unregulated spaces to regulated, and they took advantage of the $10 a day, they went from $25 or $30 or $40 a day to $10 a day. So there's another benefit to going from unregulated to regulated. I'll leave that at that for a moment. When we signed the agreement, I mean, we had gone from whatever the price was. In some cases it was $40 or $45. Some cases it was $60 or $70 a day. We had initially gone to $25 a day and then $10 a day. I will say that the number of spaces in Newfoundland and Labrador has increased significantly, not nearly where it needs to be yet, but it is growing. As costs go down, demand goes up, and that created some issues with unmet demand. When we'd gone to $25 a day, we saw a huge increase in demand. Going to $10 a day, that demand grew exponentially. So there may be more people on the waiting list, but the demand is there because families who could not afford $50 a day can afford $10, so they're now on a list. But the number of spaces also grew. I understand, having signed the agreement and the objectives of the agreement, the growth is more heavily weighted in year 3 and 4 because, you, as we say in Newfoundland, you can't knit an early childhood educator. They have to be educated, and that takes 2 years. So while we were less than half of the spaces that, you know, were forecast, or, you know, the goal, I do feel, and I'll ask you to speak to what the likelihood of meeting that 250,000 spaces is, but I understand that that growth happens as early childhood educators are educated.
So we are automatically okay. We are optimistic that the last year of the agreement will be the biggest year in terms of space creation. It's too early to say whether the target will be met or not, but we're working very hard towards that. We definitely have seen the dynamic that you referred to as you lower the price of childcare. Demand has significantly increased. One of the constraints in increasing capacity has indeed been the supply of early childhood educators, but we have seen significant labor force growth in that space, almost 30% growth in the number of early childhood educators since 2021 when the program was launched. So that's a positive sign in terms of capacity gradually coming on strength that will enable expansion, not only expansion, but better utilization also of the expanded spaces. No point expanding a space if you don't have the staff to operate it. So those two have to work in tandem, and there's been emphasis on both.
So I will go on. I know the AG report has found that affordability has improved and the pay and training. And part of this was to also see early childhood educators, recognize them for what they do. If I'm putting my children into early childhood education, I am trusting that they will prepare my children for the K-12 system. So I am calling it early childhood education because it's not just childcare, it is early childhood education. So having the system more regulated, more professional, having the professionals that educate our children and prepare them for school means that they should be paid more than what they were. And I think there's been huge success in that as well. Just wondering if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. This has been a big part of the effort as well. It's affordability, it's space creation, but it's also quality. And one of the ways to underpin quality is the quality of the workforce and the competencies and training, but also the wages. We've worked with provinces to encourage the development of wage grids. So 10 of 13 jurisdictions now have a wage grid where early childhood educators can progress their salary with different levels of experience. A bit earlier days in terms of other benefits, but pleased to see that 3 of 13 have pension programs in place, 4 of 13 have benefit programs in place. So those kinds of measures are critical to attracting and retaining the talent that's needed to assure the quality, and we continue to work with provinces on other aspects of quality assurance for the system as well. But a core part of it is the quality of the workforce and the associated salaries.
Thank you. I'm afraid that is your time, Mr. Osborne. Suivant up next, c'est Monsieur Lemire pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Thompson. Child care is a provincial responsibility. In 1987, the Premier of Quebec created these centres of excellence for early childhood excellence for children of age 4, and then even earlier than that, a little later on. It's been an incredible success, but he was a pioneer. Why then have the other provinces waited so long to do something very similar? Well, thank you for your question. It's true that the model in Quebec certainly is an inspiration for the program with respect to investment and the benefits for family, the impacts on the labor market. There has been a true spin-off for these investments in Quebec. And as you know, I think, we have an asymmetric model with respect to Quebec. The flexibility that is there and the knowledge of the progress that is made has already been achieved in Quebec. That is the goal for us to further invest and to improve the system throughout Canada using the Quebec model. That's where we draw our inspiration from. Now, with respect to the provinces, the model provides a great deal of flexibility to the provinces. There are many aspects that are under the control of the provinces and the territories. They have overall goals and objectives with respect to the results of the investment, but the details on the ground are in fact the responsibility of the provincial programs, the territorial programs. Well, Quebec has this wonderful history of what it has done, and there has been transfers of monies. What I note is this, though, is that the federal government continues to want to insert itself in provincial politics and provincial policies. There are fewer projects that are built. The rules that are different, say, in Ontario than in Quebec, with respect to the way in which the services are dispensed in childcare. So if you transfer the monies directly to the provinces, they are spent wisely. And in fact, there's been great success. As you say, in Quebec in 2021, targets changed. In Quebec, there was a target of $10 a day. But at present, according to March 24, it was $16.50 per space. So how can you explain this spread between the two costs for spaces in our province and the others? Thank you. With respect to the first part, I would say that it is up to the provinces to deal with the specifics as to the administration of the costs for the childcare spaces. And you also have the geography of the investment. There are provinces that know their needs, best know their needs. With respect to progress, clearly, it has become evident that there has been a lot of pressure on the system, the level of inflation, the cost of spaces has increased, and also the cost of operating the system, the childcare system has increased, and that is the reason why we are at $16.50 rather than $10 a day. Well, for me, this program is a success, particularly in Quebec, because the monies that were transferred, rather than, as is the case in dental care, where you have billions of dollars that is distributed by essentially checks. And so there's a loss, in a sense, of trust in the province's ability to do what it does best. Now, how much would that cost in terms of administration for the childcare program? Are you asking about the federal government or the overall cost? Well, for our department, well, we have a secretariat that is responsible for receiving and analyzing data from each province, from their reports, and it is our bargaining team. We are currently negotiating with the three remaining provinces to establish agreements. But it's a figure that is very easy to find, but I don't have it with me now. Well, can you put it in writing and send it to the committee? The federal government has signed an agreement until 2031 with respect to this. What's going to happen to the other provinces? Are the daycare systems going to, childcare systems going to remain or not? I'll give the floor back to my colleague who can speak to this. The question was, is there something that you are seeing in the future as a mechanism? Because the funding is there till 2031, and then the federal government is going to withdraw. What does that mean for jurisdictions? There is an act that was presented in Parliament, and we have a commitment from the government to continue with its investments. But doubtless, there are always unexpected possibilities. We do have examples that can reassure us that the system, even if it was truly new, would work. It would work. It gives us, well, the opportunity and the chance to families, if they want to use the system, to truly have space in a childcare place which gives a family the opportunity to operate their own budget. It's less expensive. They can participate without wondering, it's really an economic policy that is helping families. So I feel that the government has really expressed an intention to continue with the system. Doubtless, there are improvements that can be made. Progress will continue to be made. But I have to say, we really do have a significant investment. That's it. I have a passion for this program.
Deuxième tour. Madame Kuzi, Ms. Kuzi, you'll have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Hogan, your report showed that between 2020 and 2023, the number of parents who reported difficulty finding care for their children had increased by more than 30%. This difficulty came after the program had commenced. My colleague had provided his insight as to why he thinks this might possibly have been, but I wanted to ask you directly, why do you think that this occurred, this dramatic increase after the commencement of the program?
Well, I mean, I can simply speculate here because the federal government hadn't really gathered information about whether the new spaces were actually being used or not used and what were the root causes. In fact, they went to Statistics Canada in order to go get that. I think I would start off by saying that when you raise costs, obviously increased demand is going to be there. And that Statistics Canada survey did highlight that many people were saying that the new spaces created either didn't meet the needs of their children if they had special needs, that the timing didn't fit their work schedule, or that the space wasn't available in their community. So I think this speaks to the need of having the provinces provide information federally so that they can have a better picture about it's not simply about creating spaces, but it's about creating them where the need exists and helping influence how that can be so that you can speak nationally to whether or not it's meeting the needs of families.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. And with that, I'll go to Mr. Thompson. As the Auditor General indicated, outside of Statistics Canada, your department didn't properly track or assess data. Can you tell us, please, how many families are currently on wait lists?
That, unfortunately, is a data gap in the system. Provinces do not maintain, most provinces do not maintain centralized waiting lists. So the individual providers would have their individual wait lists, but that would include duplication of a lot of names. So this is one of a number of issues that where we fully agree with the AG's recommendations, and we have work underway with provinces to provide better reporting. In fact, we've just launched a portal a week ago, which will provide more timely and accurate information on the progress being made in space creation. And we're going to continue to work with provinces as they upgrade their ability to report to citizens within each province and territory.
Ms. Hogan, do you believe if the government was following through on its own agreements and ensuring the guiding principles were being met, that wait list would be shrinking and not growing by 32%, as you noted? We're hearing about the will to have these things, but are the things, should the government have included within the agreements more benchmarks, if you will, or anchors, as we've come to call them financially, to ensure that the spaces are being created in an effort to receive the funding?
I mean, I think that's one of, we issued 3 recommendations, and that's probably one of the most key ones, right? If you want to be able to show that Canadian funds met the objectives of this program, you should set yourself up at the front end to gather all that information. And there are some really important gaps. The agreements call for that kind of information sharing. So now you need to sit down with the provinces and territories. There needs to be will on both sides to be able to gather, ability to gather, and then willingness to share. But then when the federal government does get it, so in some cases we see they're not getting some information, but when they are getting the information, they're not consolidating it in order to give a global portrait for what they might already have. So I think there's some work to be done on both sides, but this is something that should be thought of at the start of the creation of a program. What do we want to measure and how do we plan on getting there? But also making sure that you have certain milestones a few years in order to show progress so that you can keep pushing towards the ultimate goal.
Okay, we're going to pause it there. We'll come back to that. Carney's meeting with Smith.
Hi, Prime Minister. How are you? It's so nice to see you. I'm so glad you're here. How was your flight?
Flight was very good.
Good.
Had a good sleep.
Oh, God. You've been so busy. I've been watching your schedule. I thought I had a busy one, but my goodness, you do. It's nice to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Shall I say a few words?
You want me to start? How
why don't you start? You're hosting. So.
Well, thank you to the Prime Minister for being here today. And this is a really great day for Albertans. We have been working for some time on addressing the 9 bad laws, as I like to call them, that have been impacting our investment climate here. And I'm pleased that we've reached an agreement to substantially work on removing and revising those laws. I think what it's going to do, especially with the removal of the emissions cap on Alberta, as well as the removal of the net zero power regs, I think it's going to unleash an incredible amount of investment and allow us to work together on important nation building projects. So it's the first step, I think, of what will be a few more steps we have to take together, but I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister has heard our concerns and responded to them.
Thank you very much, Premier. And look, it's a great day for Alberta. It's a great day for Canada. And at the heart of what is a multifaceted agreement, we have more work to do going forward, but a multifaceted agreement. In effect, it creates an energy transition, all aspects of energy, but really sets the stage for an industrial transformation. At the core of the agreement, of course, is a priority to have a pipeline to Asia. That's going to make Canada stronger, more independent, more resilient, more sustainable, because the way we're going to do that is in combination with the Pathways project, which will be the largest carbon capture project in the world. It'll mean that Alberta barrels of bitumen are amongst the lowest energy intensive in the world, therefore competitive not just for tomorrow, but for decades, as well as creating a whole new industry for Alberta and for Canada. In addition, agreements, or at least intentions around nuclear power, interties with other provinces, sovereign data centers, huge opportunity, huge necessity for Alberta and for Canada. And it's all done in a spirit of cooperation, partnership, and trust. So as the Premier just referenced, some adjustments to regulations, adjustments here in terms of strengthening the tier system, methane regs, enhancing methane regs, a cooperation agreement on regulation, which will help us move forward more efficiently and effectively. And also, just on the point of cooperation, at the heart of this is cooperation and partnership with Indigenous peoples in Alberta, in British Columbia, as they're affected. Unprecedented opportunities for Indigenous ownership, partnership, economic benefits, as well as substantial economic benefits for the people of British Columbia. So this is Canada working. This is cooperative federalism. This is Canada building with Alberta, building with Canada, building for today, but building very much for the future. And I'm very grateful, Premier, for your hard work and the hard work of your team to get us to this point. We've got more work to do, but we're going to work hard to do it. Et puis en français, oh mon Dieu, juste plutôt que ça. Alors c'est un grand plaisir de revenir en Alberta. J'ai grandi ici.
Yeah, where did they get this cameraman
et
from?
C'est une bonne journée pour le
He's
Canada,
all over the place.
Alberta, mais pour le Canada, parce que cet protocole d'accord va rendre le Canada, l'Alberta, mais le Canada, plus indépendant, plus résilient, plus fort et plus soutenable. Au sein de cet accord, il y a un oléoduc vers l'Asie, mais il y a une combinaison avec un nouveau grand projet qui s'appelle le Pathways. c'est le stockage de carbone le plus grand du monde. Ça va être une nouvelle industrie pour le Canada, pour l'Alberta et pour le Canada. Par conséquent, on va avoir des barils de pétrole d'Alberta, en effet, les plus bas, les plus compétitifs, avec les gaz à effet de serre les plus bas, et par conséquent, les plus compétitifs du monde. Ce sera une atteinte incroyable, mais c'est la vie ici en Alberta. Il y a d'autres aspects de cet accord qui concernent l'énergie nucléaire, les connexions entre les provinces, les systèmes entre les provinces, l'intelligence artificielle. Alors, c'est une transformation industrielle pour l'avenir. Et point final, au fond de cet accord, c'est la coopération. Coopération, bien sûr, entre l'Alberta et le gouvernement fédéral, coopération avec la Colombie-Britannique et surtout la coopération, les partenariats avec les peuples autochtones. Ce sera des grandes occasions sans précédent d'avoir des bénéfices économiques dans les projets. Alors, il y a beaucoup de travail à faire, mais c'est une bonne journée, comme j'ai dit, une bonne jour pour le Canada, parce que le Canada se fonctionne et on a le fédéralisme coopératif et je voudrais finalement remercier vous, Madame la Première ministre, pour votre travail et le travail de votre équipe.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks again.
They're not doing a Q&A? No? Okay, let's go back to committee.
All 13 jurisdictions have agreed on the importance of quality data. They committed to that within their agreements. And we have a federal, provincial, territorial data working group that has just recently been convened and is beginning to really dig in to make sure there's a common understanding and help being shared across the country for jurisdictions to be able to meet the reporting needs on data. Let's
ask one other question then. When the objectives are, when they get to whatever the growth point is where they have the systems available, what data have we required them to provide in the agreement? Like what are the metrics points that they're required to provide after they've expanded their systems and have the ability to provide it? How long in the future is that? And are there penalties associated with not providing the data to allow us to determine if metrics are being met?
Penalties. Every jurisdiction in the agreement commits to providing an annual report which contains how they have met their space creation targets, metrics on for-profit versus not-for-profit ratio, metrics on ECEs, workforce, wage grids, so a number of things. And they are also to provide an audited financial statement of the previous year. So we do get an annual report of the previous year as well as an audited financial statement. Failure to provide the annual report can result in a delay in the payment for the existing fiscal year to be issued. There have been cases when there's been a delay in payment to a jurisdiction for not having provided their annual report. It's not a decision we would take lightly. Families are depending on the investment to provinces and territories. However, that mechanism is very much in place, and it also applies to failure to provide an audited financial statement.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est M. Lemire pour...
Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you very much. In the Auditor General's report, she asks ESDC to do more follow-up, more monitoring. The program in Quebec is entirely the responsibility of Quebec. and the transfers of funds from the federal government has worked quite remarkably. Given this dashboard, families in Quebec have been able to achieve spaces, like Ms. Goodridge said earlier, non-subsidized spaces. But there may perhaps be the possibility to hire to hire an extra teacher, which would mean that, say, we have another space, if the space moves from 5 to 6, and that gives an opportunity to another child, and you have those who are there to lend the money, but I'm always very vigilant because it is always very difficult for the federal government to trust what a given province is doing. Are there specific elements that are requested of each province? Are they uniform? You said earlier that it was very difficult for the federal government to place trust in the administration of monies. Are you getting goodwill from the provinces? I could begin, and then I could reiterate this. Each province had a different departure point for the program, a different start point. And so there were differences in the agreements, as has been mentioned already. We do have common indicators for all the provinces and territories for the overall objectives. But I just want to know this. Is everybody satisfied, or is that old federal reflex still in place where you can't trust a decentralized model to work? It's a hybrid model with federal investments and common objectives. It is an agreement that has been negotiated with each province and territory, and there is a will to respond. There is a requirement, rather, for the response from each province. They have to administer a program that provides details that corresponds with the details of their agreement. So it's a common goal for all the country, but there is flexibility in terms of administration of the program for each province. Next, Mr. Dutel, 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. I would like to thank you, all of you, for the quality of your French. I congratulate you. Mr. Lemire, I'm sure, would join me in my saying so. Ms. Hogan, there is a sentence in your report that we see very often in your reports. We have noted that the provincial governments and territorial governments, with the exception of the government of Quebec, etc., precisely in this instance, because Quebec has had its agreement in place for about 30 years now. And as Mr. Lemire pointed out, it was created in 97, and then Ms. Freeland moved it on a federal level. But it is a program that could be provincial, 100% provincial, and could be administered by the provinces themselves. Why not? Well, I think it's quite clear that early childhood education and childcare is a program administered by the provinces. It's very clear, of course, that the federal program is coming from a very different place than the other provincial programs. But for most of the country, it was very necessary because of the higher cost of paying for the spaces. Yes, there was a federal transfer, if you like, to the provinces of funding, but it is up to the provinces to account for that money. So it's difficult for us to say if there was improvement because of federal funding or not. But the fact is, Quebec has a structure which is very different from the other provinces of the country. On paragraph 18, page 12, you say that we haven't determined for the cost for the government of Quebec because there's no requirement for an annual report with respect to the federal funding. So, from ocean to ocean, it can be different. I've never been somebody who wants one size fits all. I think it should be drawn, inspiration should be drawn from the best practices, not just for the provinces, but for the sectors as well. For example, the CPE at Saint-Urbain in Montreal, Quebec, the requirements are different for what type of system is found in the regions of Quebec. So what best practice, Ms. Hogan, can you recommend that could be put in place and could be applied for spaces in childcare systems? I think my colleagues are probably better placed to answer that, but I can tell you that from coast to coast, it is very different. Individuality, the individuality and the needs of each province is recognized in the agreements. Is it because it's a best practice, or is it just the way they operate? I think the reality really is different from province to province in each province. I don't know if there's anybody who'd like to add anything, but we really didn't approach a review of the agreements from that perspective. There are 5 targets in the legislation, how the government is going to provide accountability to Canadians about the way in which they spent the money, and also the net new spaces. In some provinces, that was the case, and not the case in other provinces. So I think there are some measures that could be corrected to have more consistent and uniform practices throughout the country. So we can say that we created the 250,000 new spaces in Canada. Yes, but is it an intrusion by the federal government in each province and territory, or is it just something that is indicated to help the provinces? Mr. Lemire might say one thing, I would say another. The way I see it is that there's a Canadian daily reality. No matter what province you live in, people who live in cities can drop the kids off at a space that is on their way to work. But when you are in a rural environment, it's quite different. I live there, and there are people that are very happy to live there. But in the suburbs or in the city center, in the core of the city, it is very different. And Mr. Dutel, question. How do you reconcile these differing realities to help people? That's where the flexibility comes in. They can decide, people can decide where the province creates the new spaces. It is up to the provinces. It's not the federal government that's going to make that decision. There are different needs if it's in a rural or an urban area. Thank you so much.
Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Oh, not yippee.
Thank you
Yep.
for doing this very important report. I'm glad all of you are here to answer our questions. Ms. Hogan, what is meant by inclusive spaces?
That's actually an area where we noticed that there was different definitions across the provinces and territories on what would be an inclusive space, and that's why it was difficult to sit back and globally say across the country whether inclusive spaces had been created. One of the requirements that we would have expected to see was whether or not there was more inclusive places based on sort of the per capita, the amount of children that were there. That information wasn't gathered. Whether or not those spaces were filled by families that were actually intended, again, information that was not gathered. So we saw this as an opportunity where there could have been a little bit more comparability put across the country if you wanted to report on this. So it was one of the outcomes, and so you should set out some key measures in order to check whether or not you met that outcome.
So why is it important for the provinces and territories to ensure eventual equitable access to regulated childcare spaces?
Well, usually this would mean families who may have been with lower income or families who had children who had special needs, and at times that would mean there are other expenses needed in a childcare if you need extra help or different tools. So again, all things that the provinces need to figure out and define. But if the goal is just simply creating more inclusive spaces and making sure they're used, the federal government had to figure out the metrics to measure that. Right?
Mr. Thompson, what steps are being taken to ensure equitable access for diverse and vulnerable families, including those in rural and remote areas?
Thank you for the question. Maybe starting out with your earlier question on inclusive spaces, I would just note that that's an important pillar in the legislation to lay out the objective of supporting inclusive spaces and the expansion and operation of an inclusive ELCC system, whether that's official language minority communities or Indigenous communities. That's laid out as a legislative parameter. There are also explicit objectives in our infrastructure agreements where funding is targeted to advance those objectives. And in the recent extension agreements that we've negotiated with provinces for the next 5 years, there's increased emphasis on the reporting around inclusion metrics around meeting some of the needs for different communities. So those are some of the measures that we've got in place.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thompson, could you comment on the data discrepancies as the provinces started from different places?
Indeed. As I said, an easier way to make early progress was on the affordability part of this in terms of providing greater subsidies. So we saw early progress, and that progress was noted in the Auditor General's report. The harder lift, if you will, was on the expansion of the childcare spaces themselves. Some provinces were starting from a very low position. Others would have had a higher level of space creation already, perhaps had more momentum. So there were some provinces that were starting from an earlier starting point and without a lot of momentum. So there's quite a variety of circumstances that were met in terms of reaching the expansion programs. There was also a little bit of a difference in terms of the signing on, timing and signing on of the agreements. Ontario, for example, signed on quite later. So there's variation in terms of the time at which different jurisdictions signed on. So those are a few of the factors that influenced the rate of space creation in the different provinces.
Okay. So I'll continue asking you, Mr. Thompson. One of the risks identified is that for most provincial and territory governments, ESDC did not assess whether the increase of educators who fully met certification requirements. With the increased demand for educators and the fact that they need to be certified, how can we be sure that they will meet the full requirements and that shortcuts won't be taken?
A few points on this. As I said, this has been a collective objective of the federal and provincial territorial governments to advance quality and to do so in the form of a workforce strategy. So that has entailed issues like wage grids and benefits where there's been some progress. There's been also good discussion on competencies. This is more complicated because each province, coming back to provincial jurisdiction, they have jurisdiction over the occupational competencies and requirements. So we're not looking at a complete harmonization, but more of a sharing of best practices on what constitutes good quality standards. So I would say as a result of our process, there's much more dialogue between provinces and territories on issues of certification and best practices in that space. I mentioned that we had a 30% increase in the workforce. So that is very encouraging. Maybe one last thing I would note, 2 other measures the federal government has put in place. We're in the process of rolling out $7.5 million through our sectoral workforce solutions program to support the development of competencies across the country, so to work with partners on advancing labor market information, competency assessment, and issues like that to facilitate growth of the workforce. I would also note that the Canada Student Loan Forgiveness, as per the last budget, is being expanded to include early childhood educators that move to remote, certified early childhood educators who move to remote areas. They can see a portion of their student loan forgiven with that's one of the expanded occupations to which that applies. So there are a few things the federal government is doing, but this is also a deep area of provincial expertise, and we're trying to really work a lot on dialogue and collaboration.
Thank you. That is your time, Ms. Shipp. Beginning our third round, we're going back to Ms. Goodridge. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the pieces that I think is the most flawed in this system is the fact that the federal government really limited the amount of spaces available to entrepreneurs. Specifically in my home province of Alberta, you put caps so that we couldn't expand childcare. And so that has meant that childcare operators are primarily women, so women entrepreneurs have been left out and are sitting there struggling. And this means that families don't have access to care because these programs, we have childcare spaces that are existing, but they're not able to access this grant because of arbitrary caps put on by the federal government. And so why was there such a focus on limiting access to these spectacular female entrepreneurs in expanding these businesses that already existed in many cases?
That's
to you, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah. Okay. just checking. Thank you for the question. On the for-profit sector, it was certainly the policy intent of this investment to support the expansion primarily of the not-for-profit sector. There was not a prohibition on expanding the for-profit sector. It was
put caps in place, very, very strict caps.
The policy objective was that the not-for-profit sector should grow at a faster rate than the for-profit sector with the investment. So both could grow, but the ratio is expected to shift more heavily towards not-for-profit. That was the policy objective. I would make 2 other observations. One, home operators were excluded from the definition of for-profit. So if you're operating out of your home, you're not considered for-profit.
If you have a really small business, you're excluded. But if you have like a 30-kid daycare and have a few employees, that's the problem. But let's have these big, giant, not-for-profit daycares in large centers. That's A-okay. But like the part that really hits me hard is I live in a rural community. I represent a rural riding. We're not talking about large centers by and large. We're talking about small centers. And those small centers are generally served by owner-operators. And your guys' systems completely left those out. And that, to me, is a huge issue. And then I think one of the other pieces that I want to hit on is I'm incredibly proud to represent Fort Wayne Cold Lake and the amazing men and women that serve in the Canadian Armed Forces there. The child care deals, as they are currently written, do not meet the flexibility requirements to serve the parents that have children that are serving our country, serving our national security needs, because they don't typically work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and they often need outside care. And these deals have left these families in Cold Lake completely out in the cold. So what is your government doing to make sure that families that are serving our country are actually able to get the flexible care they desperately need?
So a few points on that. First of all, as I said, there's no prohibition on for-profit expansion. It can be done. And there's nothing to stop provinces from making additional amendments.
That's not accurate because in my province of Alberta, they are actually limited in
ratio.
There's a ratio. So you have limited the number of spaces that can be created because you guys have set an arbitrary number, not understanding the reality on the ground in Alberta.
But that ratio only applies to the federal investment. As I mentioned, provinces have invested quite significantly in this as well, and
I'm very proud of my province of Alberta for stepping up when the federal government decided to set arbitrary limits.
To make that investment as well, and they are making that investment. The latitude for private operators also includes, and this is a consensus amongst provinces and territories, looking at the guardrails, making sure you got financial controls that need to be a bit more robust in the case of private operators. Quality assurances.
That's really frustrating to these operators that are stuck in these systems that inflation that's been out of control has hit them hard, and they are struggling to make ends meet. And you guys continue blaming these amazing female entrepreneurs, these owner-operators, and to me, that's absolutely not okay. And I will stand up against this every single day. Ms. Hogan, could you perhaps explain to us how flexibility is being measured, and are they actually meeting the needs of these parents that need outside care? Because I know in your report, it very clearly states that there are not guardrails in place to make sure that the flexible care is being met.
Mm-hmm. Many of your questions point to policy choices, and those are not things that, as you know, that my office will comment on. We comment on the implementation of the policy choice that have been made. When it came to flexibility, again, I think it's an area where there was very little parameters put out for the government to be able to report back on flexibility. And I think it was just given to the provinces as saying, you understand your needs and you set them, and there were certain criteria, as the Deputy Minister talked about, around increasing regulated spaces in the not-for-profit sector, which were policy choices that had been made. And the rest of the flexibility about where funding went specifically was left with the provinces to make.
I'm afraid that is your time. Up next is Ms. Tester-Dirksen for 5 minutes.
Okay, we're going to switch over. This just happened like 20 seconds ago, so we're not far behind.
All right, so the way we've done this before, Doug is sign and then look up.
Okay, you want to sign and look up?
Yeah.
They won't be able to tell if it's just a photo, but it's okay.
This is so cringe.
Lost art.
Thanks. Is that how he does it?
I think you got a little thumbs up.
He reads his signatures too. Do you want to stand and do them as well?
Crap, that's loud.
Okay, that's it. My work's done for the day.
Yep, that's your photo op. You're done for the day.
The minister's here as well.
You know, Minister.
I certainly do. So I see so much.
So, in other words, no new pipeline.
This is my Minister of Environment. And I think you met him. Congratulations, Minister. So are you wanting to walk and see it?
Okay, going back to committee.
Each organization would have that information, but I'm seeing Deputy Minister Thompson nod his head in agreement with me.
I could just add that provinces, again, coming at it from different starting points with different data systems. I would say scale of provincial operations is also an issue. Ontario, for example, having a very large, complicated system, much larger than some other jurisdictions, so the ability to collect data varied widely across provinces and territories, and very few had a centralized waiting list capability to know how many waiting lists an individual parent might be on, and therefore what's the actual number of parents not able to access childcare is a data point that we wish we had more insights on, but has not been available in most cases.
Thank you. So building off that point, is there potential to not renegotiate, but amend these types of agreements, or if we do extending agreements, to build in that kind of specificity so that we can be more customized when we're dealing with specific provinces based on their ability to collect this data, but making sure they're collecting the data to the best of their ability?
There are indeed opportunities to do that. I mentioned that we've got a very active federal-provincial working group that is looking at different ways of collecting the data. Coming back to the point made earlier about sharing best practices, this is an area where some provinces and territories have more innovative ways of doing this, and we are seeing dialogue and interest in sharing some of the capabilities that might exist in, they might even just replicate a system and transport it to another area, so that's an area of promise. And I would say in our extension agreements, we've got a renewed and bolstered commitment to work together on better reporting as well. So it's reflected in legislation, in new agreements, and I certainly see a will with provinces to work together on improving it.
Okay, that's great. And just kind of following along that theme, what types of responses have we been getting from provinces in general about the program, about the effectiveness of it, or how the ease of the implementation of the program requirements? Have we gotten feedback from provinces individually?
Well, we work very regularly. I certainly meet with my deputy minister counterparts at least three times a year. I've got a meeting with them in a month's time, so there's regular opportunity for dialogue. Some of this relates to the status of agreements and funding, but a lot of it relates to dialogue that wasn't happening previously on just how we can operate collectively a better childcare system. So it's basically a forum to share some of these practices and build a system together that operates out of a federal framework with funding, but allows latitude for provinces to meet some of their specific needs on the ground.
Okay, but generally it's well received by the provinces and they're eager to continue and to build the programs.
They're all enthusiastic participants. As I say, there's 3 provinces that were in the process of finalizing extension agreements. So I would take that all the others that have signed on are enthusiastic about continuing the work together, and we're very close on this remaining 3 provinces to have a renewed commitment as well. So that's a pretty good indicator of their interest in continuing in the program.
Good to hear, because in some ways...
You can just make it a quick, you're over your time, but you're on a roll, but if you have a short wrap-up, please go ahead.
Yeah, because in some ways the program has been a victim of its own success because there is some unmet demand. I know I was reading an article just the other day about the province of Manitoba. There's some criticisms about the ability to staff to roll out more spaces. So I just adding that onto my comments. You don't have to respond. Thank you.
Any response to that? You don't have to, but...
I think I've answered.
Okay, thank you. All right. Suivant encore une fois, Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Last turn. Well, I feel the passion that's in the air today with all the interveners. We are all very concerned about the early childhood education of our children. Ms. Hogan, you said that there wasn't enough stringency or funding for the First Nations. Could you tell us what you've done about that? What work have you done with respect to that? Is there data? How does it operate? That's a space in a report where it was a little bit more difficult to include ESDC, because there were also programs that existed but were administered by other departments. We wanted to improve the spaces for the Indigenous children, and the department that is supposed to deal with that horizontally, we expected that the department would have much more information. We thought there would be targets, but once again, it's the same comment and the same recommendation as with respect to the rest of the country. is there room for improvement? An example is something about, say, improving structures that would allow the federal government to find out exactly how many buildings or how many renovations or extensions of space were made available. Well, in the Quebec context, we know that in 21, Quebec set up additional new spaces. There are 4,500 available in Quebec, but with respect to Indigenous children, is there something that can be done? Does Quebec have its fair share of the spaces that would be becoming available? Well, really, I think it's Mr. Thompson that should be answering this. For the past decade, we've been trying to. They have been trying to develop a co-development plan, and with communities, with third parties, Indigenous third parties. But perhaps Mr. Thompson could add something to this. Yes, I can. Perhaps that would help my colleague. There are many Indigenous communities that depend on the existing programs, 3 that fall under the Canada Health and others under ESDC, our own department. So new investments were agreed for the continuation of the programs in these communities. But the way in which the programs are developed is co-developed, or delivered rather, is co-developed with the partners. And there has been an increase in investment at the table, 60 at the bargaining table now to negotiate the co-development and how to establish the priorities, the performance framework. We are advancing, perhaps a bit more slowly than we had hoped, but we are moving forward with respect to the Indigenous investment. We need the participation of the Indigenous communities, and we are near to developing a program framework. Thank you.
Cousy, encore une fois pour 5 minutes.
Ms. Cousy, 5 minutes.
Madame Hogan, vous avez parlé des risques.
Your mic, Ms. Cousy.
As though the government has met their guiding principles with this program or not.
Audit showed that the federal funding led to improvements. I think the most noticeable would be in affordability. There's definitely been a decline in the costs for childcare per day, and there's definitely been a creation of spaces. But what's missing is whether or not the government by the end of 2026 will be able to show that all of those goals have been missing because there's gaps in information. So there's a failure in making sure that you've set yourself up to get that information, but it's clear that the funding has helped make childcare more affordable across the country.
Okay. In your view, do you believe ESDC has properly tracked and kept data to assess whether or not the government will meet its guiding principles?
I believe most of our testimony today has been around exactly that, a gap missing. There's a key recommendation about gathering better information. I think when it's easier to track number of spaces, it's hard to know whether they're being used. It's hard to know whether they're inclusive, whether they're being, the right families are using those spaces. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement on data gathering and reporting.
Is there any other program that has been created and implemented by this government that you could use as a comparison, or alternatively a principle of IFSR that would be applicable here in terms of the fund delivery for the outcome?
Oh, I mean, that's a very difficult question for me to look at. There are so many programs across the government, and I think this is, I think some of the findings that we're finding here about the need to establish how to measure when you're in a space where it's regulated by a province. We're seeing that in other programs. We saw it in gathering health information during the pandemic. You see it in housing. So I think there needs to be a way for the federal government to work out better reporting and exchange mechanisms with the provinces and territories, because often there is a commingling of federal money, provincial money, municipal money, and how do we talk to Canadians about a program on a national level when you don't have good information sharing agreements for all of these programs. So I think there's an opportunity for all levels of government to be able to show Canadians how money's being spent in a better way.
I agree. And in addition to the example I gave earlier about the pipeline MOU, which is supposed to be announced today, I'm actually thinking of another example within my city, specifically that the government is going to withhold funding for housing should they decide to repeal the blanket rezoning. So it's really it comes with strings attached. It's not this is for the good of your community and what you decide. It has to adhere to things. In 3 instances, you note the Employment and Social Development Canada, either did not effectively assess or mislead opportunities to monitor expected outcomes of the program. Why do you think that is?
Again, it speaks to that recommendation around not at the design of this, really thinking about how to gather comparable and consistent information across the country, recognizing that everybody was starting in a slightly different place. So how do you elevate it to be able to talk consistently? And I think it's just not having that data, and at times collecting some of that data, but then not consolidating it to talk about the global picture that they have. So I think there's 2 elements that contribute to not being able to demonstrate.
Do you believe that ESDC has the tools to monitor these arrangements currently?
Well, all of the agreements clearly call for the exchange of information. And as was mentioned earlier, there is an annual report that's required, and funding can be delayed until that report is received. And we definitely saw that happening. But I think the focus needs to be is on the content of what's in there, so that you can get some more consistent and comparable information from all the provinces to speak nationally about the program.
But why would you think that the government signed individual agreements with provinces and territories, knowing the areas they wanted to track, without receiving guarantees that they would be able to receive that information from the provinces and territories? That's tied into my first round.
Well, I think all of the agreements talked about the need to exchange information, but it wasn't to the level of exactly what. And I think some of the agreements recognized, and we had a conversation just earlier from another question saying, provide information if able, recognizing that some provinces just didn't have the robustness or the maturity of a system right now. And how do you support them in getting that so that you can get national information? So I think there's a lot of parameters in place. But this is possibly an area that we see in many programs, right? Forgetting to think about exactly what we need to show outcomes. It's not just about metrics, right? It's about really the end game. And I think inclusivity and flexibility are great things. It's easy to measure number of spaces, hard to measure something that's a little less concrete, right? And so you have to think that through at the start.
Thank you very much. Going back to you, Mr. Osborne, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Follow-up to the department, the missed opportunity as identified in the AG report to monitor report effectively and to monitor the progress nationally. Can you walk us through what, if any, steps you've put in place either prior to the report being completed or since the report to improve that?
Absolutely. I guess I would first point out to the fact that I think, as noted, there was not an absence of data collection. We do have quite a reliable set of data on space creation, very good indicators on affordability, and those were some of the initial objectives. I think what the AG has pointed out is that there's a need for much more granularity on meeting some of the more nuanced objectives of the program, and we're fully committed to doing that. I mentioned the legislation establishes proper reporting as a key feature of this. We have, it's the top, if not one of the top priorities of the Deputy Minister and Minister working groups that, so my Minister Haidu, meets regularly with her counterparts. I meet with the deputies, and there's a data working group. So there's a lot of work on lifting all the boats to have a much better collective reporting system. I mentioned that just in the last week, we've launched a new portal, which would be a consolidated space to provide Canadians information on the review. The Auditor General noted there were two issues. One was collecting the information, and the second was assembling and making available. On that second issue, we are committed to assembling faster and posting in a much clearer fashion through this portal that we have the information that's available. There are a bit more limitations on what we can collect because that's a provincial capacity issue, but as I noted, we're working on that aspect as well.
Okay. So in the report, it also indicated that the department did not update its approaches to measure results, to collect information on progress towards some planned actions. Have you addressed this, or if not, what do you plan to do to update the results in measurement approaches?
Thank you for the question. I'm just trying to.
About Indigenous.
What Indigenous early learning and childcare. Thank you for that clarification. So, as I mentioned on that front, in relation to the last question, the Indigenous investments, we wanted to maintain a balance between three existing programs on which communities depended. So we wanted to keep going and providing the supports through those programs. But at the same time, we're trying to shift to a new delivery model, co-developed with Indigenous partners. This has taken us a little more time than we had hoped for, but that arises from our commitment to doing it in a co-developed way. We have 60 partnership tables with Indigenous organizations across the country, distinctions-based, to try to come up with a performance framework that meets the needs of those communities, so puts them at the center of the delivery of the programs. We are very close. We have some final steps in terms of getting Indigenous leadership approval, but at the officials level, we've made very good progress on a performance framework that would be used by the distinctions-based partnership tables across the country.
Okay, I'm going to pause it here. I want to see what Smith has to say. We're like 3 minutes behind.
Well, hello, my friends. Good morning, everyone. I hope you enjoyed hearing the comments of the Prime Minister this morning. I was pleased he was able to pop up and see you before going on to some of his other meetings today, as well as a speech at the Chamber. I'm so delighted to be here with not only members of my cabinet, but also our partners in Indigenous communities. We've got Rebecca Schultz, Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rajan Sani, Minister of Indigenous Relations, Jason Nixon, Minister of Assisted Living and Social Services. He was part of our negotiating team. Nathan Newdorf, Minister of Affordability and Utilities. Minister Brian Jean, Minister of Energy and Minerals. And then, of course, we have Billy Morin, former chief, but he's now MP for Edmonton Northwest. Former Chief Jim Boucher of the Mackay First Nation. Chris Sankey, former councillor of Laxqualam Band in British Columbia, Dave Lamouche, President of Métis Settlements General Council, Chief George Arcan Jr. of Alexander First Nation, Chief Tony Alexis of Alexander Nakota Sioux Nation, Chief Cody Thomas of Enoch Cree Nation, Chief Kelsey Jacko of Cold Lake First Nations. We also have a friend visiting from Saskatchewan, Chief Delbert Wapas of Thunderchild First Nation, and of course Stephen Buffalo, President and CEO of the Indian Resource Council. We had a few others on the list. I'm not sure that they are here, but I'm going to see more at the Indian Resource Council meeting a little bit later today, where I'm going to go for a lunch speech. But today is a great day for the people of Alberta and for all of Canada. The last 10 years have been an extremely difficult time for hundreds of thousands of Albertans and their families that directly or indirectly rely on and make their living from a strong and vibrant and growing Alberta oil and gas sector. These Albertans are mothers and fathers and young people working so hard to put food on the table, to pay for hockey and soccer fees, and to save for the down payment on their first home. These are also small business owners that too often have found themselves as well in their business working very hard to build due to a regulatory environment that has made it almost impossible for them to succeed. And more broadly, the last 10 years have left hundreds of thousands of Albertans skeptical and oftentimes questioning the long-term viability of our nation as we watched its deliberate phase-out of our province's most valuable asset, leaving it trapped and wasted in the vast oil sands of northern Alberta, and with it, innumerable lost investment opportunities and tens of thousands of lost jobs. These were dark times, but in those difficult circumstances, Albertans came together, as we always do, to raise our voices and use our ingenuity to find a way to overcome the challenge. We fought and won in the courts of law. We fought and won in the court of public opinion. And we fought because we had to, because that's what Albertans do. We always fight very hard for this province that we love so dearly and for its incredible people. But Albertans are also proud and loyal Canadians. We don't fight for the sake of fighting. We don't look for conflict when there's an opportunity for peace and prosperity. Albertans are happiest when we are hard at work getting things done, solving problems, creating opportunities, building our province and our country. That is when we are truly at our best. However, in order for Alberta to find its way to prosperity within a united Canada, we need the federal government to partner with us instead of fighting against us. Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney and I may not always agree on everything, but we do share a few key beliefs. We both know that Canada can never reach its true potential as a global energy superpower without a strong and thriving Alberta energy sector at the center of that effort. And I am pleased to say that this Prime Minister has made it clear to me that he is willing to work with me and Alberta's government to accomplish that shared goal. And that, my friends, is something that we have not seen from a Canadian Prime Minister in over a decade. And it is my firm belief that Albertans from right across the political spectrum, whether they be staunch federal Conservatives or Liberals or New Democrats or something else, they expect me as their Premier to partner with this federal government to seize this long-awaited opportunity for our province. I've spoken at length about the need to build more pipeline infrastructure, to export more oil to hungry Asian markets, and to diversify our customer base. I have repeatedly stated how critical it is to reform a broken regulatory environment that is scaring away investment and demoralizing our energy entrepreneurs here at home. And I have asked repeatedly for the federal government to cease their attempts to throttle our energy industry, repeal or overhaul their 9 bad laws, and work with Alberta to grow our energy sector for the benefit of the entire country. And today's agreement is the first step in accomplishing all of these critical objectives and unleashing the power and promise of Alberta's energy sector in a way never seen before in this country. This agreement means the end of the punitive oil and gas emissions cap so that our great energy producers can grow and thrive again. This agreement means the immediate suspension of the federal net zero power regulations in Alberta, which had placed our electrical grid at a very serious risk of failure and limited any hope of substantial investment in AI data centers and applications development. This agreement includes a clear path to the construction of an over 1 million barrel per day Indigenous co-owned bitumen pipeline to Asian markets so that our province and our country are no longer dependent on just one customer to buy our most valuable resource. This agreement also allows for needed adjustments to the tanker ban when the new pipeline to Asia is approved by the Major Projects Office, as well as amendments that will ensure our companies are able to advertise their environmental leadership and efforts throughout the world without a fear of penalty. And this agreement also means that Alberta will be a world leader in the development and implementation of emissions reduction infrastructure, particularly in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Alberta has a unique opportunity to show the entire world that the solution for reducing emissions does not entail capping productivity, growth, or innovation in oil and gas development. Rather, it is to leverage the profitability of the oil and gas sector to invest in the very technologies that will revolutionize all industries in their effort to reduce emissions globally. This agreement means Alberta will work with our federal partners and the Pathways companies to commence and complete the world's largest carbon capture, utilization, and storage infrastructure project. It will also make Alberta heavy oil the lowest intensity barrel on the market and displace millions of barrels of heavier emitting fuels around the globe. This is Alberta's moment of opportunity. our opportunity to show the nation, as well as the entire world, that resource development and emissions reduction can not only coexist, but can actually complement one another for the benefit of billions of people around the world. Alberta is willing to take on and conquer the challenge as partners with the federal government. Now, I need to be clear, the government is this agreement with the government is just the first step in this journey. There is much more hard work to be done. Trust must be built and earned in the partnership as we move through the next steps of this process, whether that be working with the federal government to prepare our bitumen pipeline submission for the Major Projects Office, or putting together the final elements of a carbon pricing agreement that will be implemented through the province's tier program that balances competitiveness with accountability for heavy emitters. And although I am not blind to the fact that the people of Alberta have had the rug pulled out from underneath them too many times to count over the past 10 years, I also know that a new relationship and a new beginning needs a starting point grounded in good faith. And today, I hope, is that new starting point. So I do want to thank the Prime Minister. So I do want to thank the Prime Minister as well as his team for working with my team to get this agreement to the finish line. I'd also like to thank our negotiating team, and that included Ministers Jason Nixon and Rajan Sawhney, along with my Chief of Staff, Rob Anderson, and Deputy Ministers Liam Stone and Larry Comeyer for the great work that they did on this initiative. And I'm excited, as is my government and our UCP MLAs, to roll up our sleeves and to continue the work on this remarkable opportunity for Alberta and for Canada. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you.
It's actually not bad. I'm not going to lie, it's actually not bad.
Now, I think
Thank
Sam
you,
Blackett is
Premier.
somewhere moderating questions. Oh, there he is.
Yes,
Over
we'll
in the
now
back.
start the media Q&A. We are tight in time today. We'll be taking one question, one follow-up per usual. Please state your name and outlet before asking your question, and we'll start off at our mic in the room. Go ahead.
All right, Heather Yurix-West from Global National. Thanks for taking my question.
Yeah.
What is your view, Premier, of the power of BC or a First Nation to veto a potential pipeline deal? The MOU talks a lot about consultation, but what happens if an agreement can't be reached?
Well, as you can see, the MOU does not contain a veto, but I think that we both recognize jointly that there is a requirement for consultation, and indeed, we believe that there's an imperative for Indigenous ownership. We created the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, and it expanded its ability to underwrite up to $3 billion worth of loan guarantees. I see British Columbia also has a similar program. The federal government has a similar program. And so Minister Sawhney has already begun the engagement. She's been to Kitimat, she's been to Prince Rupert, she's been talking with the BC and Alberta nations. And we know that that's hard work that needs to be done, that we will do, we intend to do, and we're looking forward to having genuine consultation and ownership. And as for Premier Eby, I spoke with him last night. And there's lots in the agreement that we can focus on together, where he is supportive of the expansion of the Trans Mountain pipeline capacity. He is supportive of Intraties and working with us on nuclear. He's supportive of working with us on expanding additional LNG export as well as ammonia. So may not be in agreement with everything that is in this proposal, but we're going to have trilateral talks to make sure that we can move forward on the elements in this plan.
And my follow-up, do you think this MOU will be enough to distinguish, quell any remaining separatist sentiment that may remain in Alberta?
I hope so. I mean, I had always felt that the former government of Justin Trudeau created the independence movement, and my first conversations with Prime Minister Mark Carney were that he could end it. He could take the wind out of it. Because we saw this once before. We saw that independence sentiment was very high in the early 1980s when there was the National Energy Program. But when Brian Mulroney came in and reversed that policy, it disappeared. So I would say that good policy and genuinely addressing the concerns of Albertans is always a pathway to have a good and solid relationship. And I think the Prime Minister understands that. Certainly, based on this agreement, it shows he does, and so I'm hopeful.
Thanks.
Hi, Premier. Ezra Levant from Rebel News. The first deadline in the MOU, if I'm reading it right, is April, where the duty is on Alberta to jack up carbon taxes. And the last date in the MOU, if I'm reading it right, correct me if I'm not, is 2040. That's when this pipeline, that's sort of the end date. It can't be any later than that. In terms of building trust with the anti-oil liberals, they're asking Alberta to raise carbon taxes now for a promise of an oil pipeline years or even more than a decade in the future. Does that really build trust?
Well, you have to start somewhere. And one thing I would say is that we did have the Supreme Court of Canada rule on the federal government's ability to set a price on emissions. So the Supreme Court has ruled on that. It's part of the reason why we negotiated a stringency agreement that would have seen the carbon tax price go up to $170 a barrel by 2030. We've demonstrated, and I think the Prime Minister agrees, that's too high, too fast. So that's why we understand that there was always going to be a negotiation around that. We froze the carbon tax at $95, pending consultation with the industry and greater work with the Prime Minister. But remember, Alberta was the first to have an industrial carbon price. They did we implemented that in 2007. It's generated revenues that have allowed us to invest billions of dollars in new technologies, including carbon capture. So there is a commitment on the part of the industry to have a carbon price, and we did do some consultation on that. We're just glad that we have the means to manage it our way in Alberta under our tier program, and you'll see as of April 1st, and no, that wasn't a joke. April 1st is going to be the date that we have an agreement on that front. When it comes to the building of a bitumen pipeline to Asian markets to the BC coast. Though, if you read the MOU, those two things have to happen in tandem. That we have to see the Pathways project proceeding at the same time as an agreement to build that. One is dependent on the other. I don't know that the Prime Minister would have agreed to a new bitumen pipeline without Pathways, and we wouldn't have agreed to Pathways without a new bitumen pipeline. So they are going to be staged. They are going to go on together. We've already had a meeting with Pathways about how we're going to do that. That will require a trilateral negotiation as well. But I'm very hopeful. Since we have used carbon capture technology before for enhanced oil recovery, that's another part of this announcement, is that CO2 will be able to be used for enhanced oil recovery, which should allow us to generate more revenue. So I would say that you don't always get 100% of what you want, but we addressed 7 out of the 9 bad laws that I'd put on the table to, I think, what will be the satisfaction of Albertans. And I think that this will allow us to see some substantial investments.
I mean, that's the thing about a peace deal. You have to make it with an enemy. So I suppose the fact that for a decade, his Glasgow financial alliance for net zero, it was about putting a capital strike on the oil and gas sector. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was asked about pipelines, and he said, boring. So is there anything, I mean, after a lifetime of attacking the oil patch, he was even interrogated by the U.S. Congress for an attempt to capital strike their oil companies. Is there anything the Prime Minister has said to you in private that you could share with us that would signal that his lifetime's work of attacking carbon-based fuels will somehow be put to the side? Like, I think he's just a slightly smarter version of Stephen Guilbeault. I think he hates the oil patch as his life's work. Is there anything he's said to you that make you believe that maybe he can be turned on this?
Well, I'll start by saying my joke has been that I would love for pipelines to be boring again. I would love for, no matter what party is in power, what level of government, that there wasn't sort of an overwrought response anytime anyone talked about building a pipeline. It's actually quite remarkable that we're talking about expanding uranium mines, building nuclear power plants, building new transmission lines through pristine areas, massive new mining projects, and not one of them has raised any ire on the part of any environmental group or anyone in the media, but there has been all of this ire raised around a pipeline. So I hope that we can make pipelines boring again, because it's just a way to get our product to the consumers who need it. I would say that, as you know, I was not a huge champion of carbon capture technology when I was in politics the first time. I wasn't. But I've seen with the passage of time, the investments being made and the fact that the technology works and we're getting better and better at it, and you can create a product out of it including so that you can enhance oil recovery, I changed my mind. And so I would say that the Prime Minister, maybe in the past 10 years, it looked like wind and solar and batteries were going to be the ability to power industrial economies. I think the world discovered that's not true. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the instability in the Middle East, everyone is having to recalibrate and rethink that. I was recently in the Middle East, and the conversation around the table now is talking about natural gas as a foundational fuel, not a transition fuel. So I think that demonstrates that there is a global understanding of how important it is to have reliable electricity. And so I have to just give the Prime Minister credit for perhaps he's recalibrating his own thinking on this. It certainly seems to be in the agreement that we signed, but we will trust, but we will verify. We will make sure that he lives up to the commitments in this agreement that we had, and we have to proceed somewhere with a measure of good faith. I can tell you 100% that the former Prime Minister would never have moved this far on these issues. We tried for 3 years, we got nowhere. And in my very first meeting with the Prime Minister, I said to him, you know, the way that we can get to an agreement is just orienting around a 2050 target. Our industry is there. We think it's achievable with technology. And you'll see in the context of this MOU that the interim targets are gone. And so that's what we're going to move forward on. And we'll see as we meet these milestones whether I'm correct or whether your skepticism is correct.
Thanks, Ezra. We're going to take one more from the room, then take one or two from the phones before coming back to the room. Go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Laura Osmond with The Logic. When it comes to trying to find a proponent for this pipeline, is this MOU enough to start bringing private investment on board? Or in your conversations with potential proponents, are they looking to get farther down the line? At what point do you think you might be able to announce some kind of proponent taking over?
Well, I think that the fact that this room filled up with, 24 hours notice gives you an idea of the enthusiasm that we have in the sectors that make billion-dollar investment decisions. And many of the people in this room have been holding on to capital or redeploying it elsewhere. So I think that's going to cause a lot of really interesting conversations now that they've seen the structure of this agreement. And we'll know in the coming weeks and months, generally speaking, about final investment decisions. But I've been encouraged to see that even with the announcement in the budget that they were looking at not implementing the emissions cap, which we confirm today, you've seen Enbridge talk about 400,000 barrels a day on their main line that they want to expand. TMX has talked about an additional 400,000 barrels per day that they want to optimize. South Bow, using the old Keystone assets, have talked about a 650,000 barrel a day project. I've been in touch, the folks from the St. Lawrence Seaway Group have been in touch with me saying, can we get oil to Thunder Bay so that we can get it out on tankers to markets in Europe. We have oil by rail projects being talked about going all the way to Nova Scotia and being exported out of Sydney. I'm watching with great interest as Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew negotiates an economic corridor co-owned with First Nations, and whether there's an opportunity for us to also be able to have a pipeline go there and also reach European markets. Doug Ford and I signed an MOU about perhaps having a spur line going to James Bay with a similar kind of model. So all of those projects are now going to be able to go ahead because there is not going to be an emissions cap on our production. And in the meantime, because I think our biggest opportunity is a new market, a new pipeline to get to markets in Asia, I'll be spending a lot of time working on that. So we have, I think, 20 individuals at our table giving us advice from all of the big pipeline companies who have over 100 years, I think, of expertise, more than that, I think, combined in doing these kinds of big projects. And in the end, you'll see the MOU says that we want a private proponent to build that. I don't think it would be success if we have to have the federal government once again have to pay for an overpriced, expensive pipeline. I think we want to create the conditions so that the private sector has confidence and will build it. So that's what we're working towards. We knew we needed to get through these first few phases, but I'm pretty confident with the people we have at the table that one or a consortium of them, once we establish that it is on the major projects list, will be willing to take this on.
You have mentioned that it's a long road. You still have to build trust. You've had the rug pulled out from you before. Pipeline aside, is the changes to the emissions cap and the clean energy regulations enough, do you think, to increase oil production in Alberta and improve the investment environment here?
Well, I think almost certainly. The problem with the emissions cap is that, especially with the interim targets of 2030 and 2035, the only way to achieve that, because we wouldn't have been able to build the carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or the fuel variety like nuclear, or have advanced direct air capture. The only way to achieve them would be to shut in production. And it wasn't just us saying that. There's several different reports that went out saying as much as 2 million barrels a day would have to be shut in by 2035. So we now have a longer time horizon to address the issues of emissions. We've a big change is that we're going to have a look at heavy oil on the basis of emissions intensity compared to other heavy barrels around the world. That is also, I think, going to be a major confidence booster. And then on the other side, when I was recently in the Middle East, I talked to a company, Taka, that had talked about wanting to do an AI data center. They were going to build their own natural gas power, but they told me because of the clean electricity regs, which meant they'd have to turn it off in 2035, they didn't even get started. And I have to wonder how many other projects of that nature didn't even get started because of the clean electricity regs. So now that there's an immediate suspension of that, there will, of course, be pending our agreement on what the tier pricing will be. But there has always been a carbon price on heavy emitters, and that included in the electricity sector. So I think we'll be able to give that injection of confidence. I guess we'll know in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. We're going to go to the phones for one and then come back to the room for our last one. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Your first caller comes from the line of Ryan Humilty from Toronto Star. Your line is now open.
Yeah, good afternoon, Premier. Thanks for taking the question. The MOU sets out obligations on both Alberta and the government. If the government of Canada lives up to its obligations, but a private proponent doesn't emerge for the bitumen pipeline, is Alberta still committed to increasing its carbon price and the other commitments that you've made on pathways and other projects?
Well, as I said, we have always had a carbon price. We were the first to put one in place in 2007. We have just recently made changes to TIER to allow those revenues to be recycled back to companies so that they can invest in carbon capture technology. We have put in place our ACIP program, which is our carbon capture incentive program, where we rebate 12% of the cost of any investment in carbon capture. We've got a major center in central Alberta where 10 different direct air capture projects are underway. We have signed agreements not only with the federal government but with our fellow premiers on looking at how we would add nuclear to the grid. So all of those things are underway. All of those things will continue to go. And what we're very hopeful is that as we stage gate the development of a bitumen pipeline, we'll also do the same thing with the Pathways project. And then we'll be able to have the largest carbon capture project in the world, which I think will also be another major export opportunity for us. So I would say that we showed our commitment when we released our energy development and emissions reduction plan in April of 2023. And most of the elements that we announced then, you'll see, are enshrined in this agreement that we have today.
And then the coastal First Nations, especially, but certainly BC as well, have said so far publicly, they said they really don't support this pipeline. It seems like the MOU puts bringing those people on side in your court. Can you expand upon how you intend to do that and how you intend to see that happens?
Well, I can tell you that there are some leadership in some nations that have been vocal, absolutely. But as you can see, there are some leaders of some nations that are in this room supportive as well. And that's the nuance that happens. There will be, no matter whether it's a nation or whether it's a province or whether it's a political party, there's just different opinions on things. But what this agreement shows is that we're going to work collaboratively to work towards a bitumen pipeline to Asian markets on the West Coast. And when we arrive at a port that will also have a tanker ban carve-out for that. So I would say that my Indigenous Relations Minister is doing tremendous work on doing the initial engagement, which will ultimately lead to a more formal consultation process. We're beginning with a spirit of goodwill, having had some success with our AIOC. I think that demonstrates credibility in having a meaningful equity ownership stake. And we've had very constructive meetings. I had a very constructive meeting you may have read with the Haisla chief and council and others yesterday, where they may not be 100% behind a bitumen pipeline, but they're excited about LNG export. They wanted us to make sure that we knew that Kitimat is a thriving port for all kinds of commodities. And so I think that that's where the relationship begins. Let's talk about areas of agreement, and then let's work through the areas of disagreement. But I think that we will find over time that there are many nations who are also interested in these kinds of projects so they can bring prosperity to their people. And that's our starting point on this.
Thank you. And if you're really quick, Premier, we might be able to squeeze in 2 more. Okay. And we'll go to our next to the mic.
Sheila Gunn-Reid with Rebel News. Just staying on the topic of British Columbia, the Prime Minister has said in the House of Commons just 2 days ago, we believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. Now, just now, after he left the signing with you, his press release says these projects will only be built in consultation and partnership with Indigenous rights holders and British Columbia. So what is the real strength of this MOU when you have a partner who keeps giving veto to British Columbia?
Well, you'll see in the agreement there's no mention of veto. I think that there obviously has to be trilateral discussions with British Columbia to find areas of common ground, and I think we will. And there's also clearly going to have to be a formal consultation process with Indigenous bands, and we're prepared to do all of that. What I have seen is that there have been a number of projects in British Columbia that may have started off with a lot of opposition that over time got a lot of enthusiasm. Look at all of the LNG projects down the coast. Look at Coastal GasLink. Look at the opportunity now for additional LNG projects. Look at even the Premier of British Columbia talking about expanding TMX. That was not the conversation that was happening 5 or 6 years ago. So I would say that some of it is in the proving. You have to prove that you're listening, prove that you are being genuine in the consultation, genuine in addressing the environmental and other issues that are raised. And that's what we intend to do. We intend to be involved every step of the way to make sure that we're able to bring people on board with this. But it's a process. We know it. This is the first stage of it. But having the Prime Minister agree in principle that getting 1 million additional barrels to Asian markets is a good thing for us and for Canada, I think that's a major milestone.
Now, British Columbia, however, says that they're blindsided. They say they're considering a lawsuit, which could tie up any potential private sector proposal for years. It might even act as a deterrent to a private sector pipeline proposal. Has the Prime Minister given you any assurances that he would use constitutional means, like the notwithstanding clause, to prevent a proposed project from getting bogged down in a legal quagmire for years?
Well, I don't think he needs to use the notwithstanding clause because this is federal jurisdiction. Trans-border pipelines, trans-border infrastructure, ports, those are all federal jurisdiction. And I think that British Columbia has tried to use every tool in the toolbox, I guess was the term that they used before, and failed. It was clearly affirmed by the courts that this is not British Columbia's decision to make. That being said, we understand that there's a process we have to go through. We understand that Indigenous partnership is key to that. And so we are wanting to get the project to a point where it's on the major projects list, at which point there's a 2-year window to get to approval. So we've got our work to do over the next number of months, but that's the commitment on the part of the federal government, is that once something is on the major projects list, it will have a new approach so that it can be approved in 2 years. And again, trust but verify, we're going to hold them to that.
Thank you. And yes, we have time for one last question. Just keep it quick, please, and thank you.
Hi, Premier Matt Skase with the Globe and Mail. This MOU talks about working collaboratively with companies to get CCUS built. How are you going to bring those 3 parties together, government, CCUS companies, and obviously there's a carbon capture incentive right now to support the project at the 12%. Are you going to change that formula at all?
So a couple of things. We have already demonstrated how we're going to support the project on our end. The 12% rebate on capital costs, that's our investment tax credit. But the recycling of the tier revenues, that's really significant because the pipeline companies in Pathways, or pardon me, the production companies in Pathways Group, they already pay, I think, $300 to $400 million in carbon tax fees through the industrial carbon tax. Having them be able to recycle those back to dedicate to this kind of project, that's our commitment. So that was a change that we made on consultation with the industry. The remaining is going to be coming from the federal government. They've got a 50% ITC, and the main thing that we were able to agree to with Ottawa is if you're going to have a project that is going to cost substantial dollars, you need to have a new revenue stream to pay for it. So if in the end the Pathways projects cost $10 to $20 billion, but they're also earning $20 billion a year for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, that becomes a more viable project for those companies. If it's just a cost on them with no additional hope of revenue, that was what they were facing. Now that we can see these two things go together, I'm pretty confident we'll come up with a trilateral agreement where the federal government will take a part. We'll obviously allow the pipeline companies or the production companies to keep more of what they earn, and then they will also put forward a portion of the cost.
Mm-hmm. This also comes with complete carve-out for Alberta on the clean energy regs, removing greenwashing provisions. Do you feel like Alberta is a winner in these negotiations?
Well, I can tell you I had a pretty happy caucus when we talked about it yesterday. So I would say that we put on the table what it is that we wanted to achieve. And I talked about the nine bad laws. And let me just go through them so that you know why it is we're feeling like this is a win for Alberta. First of all, one of the things I wanted was no export taxes or restrictions on Alberta oil and gas. Well, we got that. A complete redo of C-69. Well, not only are we going to get that through the Major Projects Office, but we have an agreement that intra-provincial projects are going to be approved by us. And there's going to be a rewrite of that bill. Emissions cap, gone. Carbon pricing stays provincial. We've got that. The clean electricity regulation scrap, we got that. Tanker ban carve-out, we got that. The censorship of energy, we got that. That's 7 out of 9. That's not so bad. We're gonna win them in court on the declaration of plastics as toxic. We already won round 1, so we're gonna keep on going so that we win that one too. And they have realized that their net zero cars are not going to work. They've already done a 1-year reprieve on that, and I suspect that's going to also have to be significantly modified or gone. So as you can see, these are the things I put on the table and have for years. And we finally have a partner in Ottawa that has recognized that the policies are unworkable, impractical, damaging to Canada, damaging to Alberta. And I think this agreement is the first step in being able to correct 10 bad laws, or 9 bad laws over 10, I think, years where our economy was depressed. And it allows for us to make sure that we don't have a repeat over the next 10 years.
Thank you, and that'll conclude today's press conference. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Okay, let's switch over to Carney. We'll be about 5 minutes behind, but we're going to see what he has to say because he's speaking with reporters now, too. I don't know why they just didn't do this together, but...
To take questions?
Yep.
First question?
Pas de questions? No questions? Okay, no, just kidding.
Yes, please. The mic is over there.
There's the mic over there.
First question, première question.
Anis Hidari, CBC. Prime Minister, are you willing to approve a pipeline even if British Columbia or affected First Nations don't agree? Would you compensate them instead?
Well, just to be clear, this agreement today between Alberta and the Government of Canada, it's the first step. It's an example of cooperative federalism. We're agreeing in partnership and in a spirit of trust. But what has to happen, several things have to happen before a pipeline is built. And one of those is a private sector proponent. Secondly, goes directly to your question, which is that there needs to be full partnership including equity ownership, substantial economic benefits with First Nations in Alberta, First Nations in British Columbia, as well as agreement and substantial economic benefits for the people of British Columbia. So we look at this as the start of a process. We've created some of the necessary conditions for this to happen. But there's a lot more work to do, and very much in the spirit of partnership. Et en français, c'est un grand moment pour l'Alberta et pour le Canada, mais c'est le commencement d'un processus. Un processus qui ont besoin de beaucoup de choses. On commence avec un acteur dans le secteur privé, un proponent pour l'oléoduc, pour le pipeline. Deuxièmement, et c'est fondamental, il faut avoir un partenariat avec des peuples autochtones ici en Alberta et en Colombie-Britannique, un partenariat avec des bénéfices substantiels et ça inclut des actions dans le projet et des bénéfices substantiels pour les peuples de la Colombie-Britannique. Alors, comme j'ai dit, c'est le commencement d'un processus d'engagement, un processus de discussion, un processus de partenariat.
Just to follow up to that, what if there aren't any private sector proponents? You mentioned them there.
Well, if there's not a private sector proponent, there won't be a pipeline. I mean, and let me say another thing, if I could, just to take advantage of your question, which this agreement is about much more than just a pipeline. Pipeline's obviously an important component to this, and specifically as a priority of Pipeline to Asia. But it's also the Pathways Project, the world's largest carbon capture storage project, a project that will make Alberta energy, specifically oil and gas, competitive for the long term because it'll make it low carbon. A project that will create an entirely new industry, an industry that needs workers, like the workers here. It's also about nuclear. Building nuclear capacity in Alberta, building interties, transmission interties. We need a lot of iron for transmission interties with British Columbia, with Saskatchewan, so we have a much more efficient and competitive and lower cost grid. And it's about building AI data centers that are sovereign, to use the word. So that means that we control in Canada our data, our information, our intelligence, if I can put it that way. So it's a very ambitious and comprehensive partnership, and there's many things that can be done going forward.
Et aussi en français.
En français, c'est alors, s'il n'y a pas un acteur dans le secteur privé pour le pipeline, il n'y aura pas une pipeline, c'est évident. C'est pas une question d'argent du gouvernement fédéral, ni du gouvernement fédéral, ni du gouvernement de l'Alberta. Mais cet accord, ce protocole, est plus grand qu'une pipeline. Ça inclut le stockage de carbone, le projet de Pathways, le plus grand projet de stockage de carbone du monde, de nouvelles industries pour l'Alberta et pour le Canada. Ça inclut l'énergie nucléaire, ça inclut des connexions entre les systèmes d'électricité de la Colombie-Britannique, l'Alberta et de Saskatchewan, et puis peut-être le territoire de Nord-Ouest et du Yukon. Et puis, ça inclut des centres de données dans le domaine de l'intelligence artificielle. Il y a beaucoup à faire. On va avoir besoin de beaucoup de travailleurs spécialisés comme ceux et celles ici. Voilà.
Laurence Tachereau, Radio-Canada. On va poursuivre en français, puis ensuite en anglais, si vous voulez bien. Comment pensez-vous être en mesure de garder Stephen Guilbeault au sein de votre cabinet après avoir signé cet accord?
Cet accord, c'est le commencement d'un processus, comme j'ai dit. Par exemple, en ce qui concerne des aspects environnementaux, il faut déterminer le processus pour le projet de Pathway, de stockage de carbone, de l'énergie propre. Et le renforcement au sein de cet accord, c'est un renforcement du système de tir, c'est-à-dire le prix industriel de carbone. Et il y a un engagement du province d'Alberta d'enlever le prix effectif dans le système de tir à $130.
c'est plus de 6 fois que le prix est maintenant. Alors, ça, c'est un exemple. Il y en a autres, mais un grand exemple que le renforcement des règles ou des systèmes effectifs en ce qui concerne les réductions de gaz à effet de serre dans cette école. Alors, c'est un processus pendant les prochaines, jusqu'au début du mois d'avril.
Si je veux juste faire un suivi là-dessus, est-ce que c'est suffisant parce qu'il y a une menace de Stephen Guilbeault de quitter le cabinet? Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est suffisant?
C'est suffisant pour le gouvernement du Canada. Ça, c'est... moi, je suis le Premier ministre. Il faut prendre des décisions dans l'intérêt de l'Alberta, du Canada, et il faut avoir des résultats. Des vrais...
Okay, I'm just checking. He's just going to answer questions in French for the rest now, so... And Premier Smith is live on CTV. I want to hear what she has to say.
Alberta, we've been talking all morning through our special coverage of what's in that memorandum of understanding and reaction to it. Right now, we have live with us from Calgary as well, I think just down the hall, the Premier of the province, Danielle Smith. Premier Smith, it's a pleasure to see you. As always, thank you so much for making the time.
Hi, Bashi.
I was listening to your press conference very closely just a few moments ago, and my impression was you were speaking as though it's kind of a done deal with this pipeline. And I just wanted to be clear for our viewers. If there is no private proponent, this pipeline doesn't get built, correct? Still?
That's what it says in the MOU. We're looking to have a private proponent build it. And that's, I think, the whole purpose of this exercise with the Major Projects Office, is that we want to ensure that we've got a regulatory process that is not only predictable, but will also result in a positive outcome. And once we get to that point, I have no doubt that a private proponent, either a single one or a consortium, will step forward to build. And that's what we're working towards.
There is also language in the MOU, though, around a backstop, about the potential backstop, I should say, at both the federal and the provincial level when it comes to Indigenous co-ownership. What does that mean? Is that in the form of loans? Or, to be clear, again, for Albertans and Canadians watching, like, is there any taxpayer money going into this thing?
Well, I can tell you the approach that we've taken, which I'm pleased to see that other provinces and the federal government have replicated, is offering loan guarantees. One of the insights that my predecessor, Jason Kenney, had was that one of the reasons why bands are not able to take on ownership stakes is because they need a bank to ensure that they will underwrite the loan. And that's what we step in with. We do it through our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. We have the ability to underwrite up to $3 billion in loan guarantees. We're about $750 million right now on a variety of projects. And that's what we would put towards this, is the offer of a loan guarantee. I think the British Columbia government has something similar. The federal government does as well. But that has proven successful, especially on these kinds of projects that have a long-term revenue stream associated with tolling once they're up and running.
But that's the limit to the backstop that you would provide with taxpayer dollars, correct? Like, it would come in that form. It would not be through any other means to fund the construction of a pipeline.
That would be the intention, definitely.
The intention, or what will actually happen?
Well, look, Coastal GasLink is partially owned by AIMCO. The Caisse de dépôt et placement owns a portion of the DP World ports. So there have been instances in the past where various pension funds have come in and also had a portion of various pipeline infrastructure and other projects, as long as they're profitable and have a revenue stream. But those decisions aren't made by me. They're made by the various pension fund managers that we have.
You referenced a conversation with Premier Eby last night, as well as Premier trilateral talks. The MOU talks about engagement with coastal First Nations, as well as, or First Nations more largely, as well as the province of British Columbia. I have to ask, look, I've conducted a number of interviews with the Premier of British Columbia on this subject. The one thing that confounds me is why he wasn't brought into the discussions earlier. Did you and the Prime Minister put the prospect of this project at risk by not bringing him and coastal First Nations into the fold earlier? And if so, why?
Well, I know I've done many, many conversations with you where I think every press conference, every time I was asked about this, I said that we were in conversations with the federal government over this, that we were going back and forth, that we had multiple different drafts, that we had a negotiating team. I've been talking about that for months. So the reason why we had to is most of the elements of this deal are related to Alberta. Removing the emissions cap was vitally important for us to get all projects going ahead. Getting the carve out on the clean electricity regs, that applies to Alberta because 90% of our power
grid is natural gas, and various other elements. The greenwashing bill to be able to get that also repealed. So there were a number of things that we had to do here to restore confidence in developing the production side of the business, but also restore confidence in being able to deploy new electricity infrastructure as well. So most of the MOU deals with creating an investment climate for Alberta. And then the federal government, as you know, is solely responsible for cross-border infrastructure, including pipelines. That's been litigated before. And I'm glad to see that the Prime Minister has an intention to work with us on that.
And I take your point about a large part of this applying to your province, but there's another big part, if this pipeline does go ahead, that clearly applies to British Columbia, including the potential removal or exemption. I know the language is very specific in the document around the tanker ban. The point that Premier Eby has made is that even speculation around that has put very real, as he characterizes it, projects around LNG at risk, because coastal First Nations have supported those projects because there is a tanker ban. I have heard you on multiple occasions talk about the imposition of laws that you consider bad and put investments in your province at risk. Why would you participate in a process that does the same for another premier? Can you understand how he feels?
Well, I believe in the Constitution, and so I know things that are intra-provincial projects are the responsibility of the province, but ports are federal jurisdiction, cross-border pipelines and transmission lines are federal jurisdiction, and trade and commerce is federal jurisdiction. You cannot have a province blocking access of another landlocked province to get their products to market. That's been determined by the courts. And so we're very pleased to already start the consultation and with the nations, including coastal First Nations. I had a very pleasant conversation with the Haisla chief yesterday, and they made it very clear that they're open to all kinds of work with Alberta on all kinds of products, maybe not as enthusiastic about bitumen, but they're also excited about expanding LNG and also expanding additional export opportunities. So I would say I have not experienced what Premier Eby has described. I haven't heard a single nation that we've engaged with in British Columbia say that they're going to trade off one against the other. They're letting us know what their perspectives are. We're pleased for that. And we're going to keep on working with them to see if we can put together a consortium that will also be able to own a portion of this new line.
I have seen, some of those First Nations put out specific statements, but with respect to what you said about the federal jurisdiction here, I do take your point on their constitutional ability with interprovincial projects, but I also remember many times when you have not believed in the Constitution as it applies that way, when you have fought against, for example, decisions to impose carbon pricing, even though the Supreme Court dictated that that was in federal jurisdiction. Again, I'll put to you, is the project not more at risk because BC and those coastal First Nations were not brought into the fold earlier?
I don't think so. I mean, I've not heard any nation say they're going to cancel their support for LNG Canada 2.0 because of any conversations Alberta's having. I just don't think that's true. But what I will say is that we respect the Constitution and also the Supreme Court. They did make a decision that the federal government does have the right to set floor prices on CO2, which is why that forms a basis for our agreement. We have a tier agreement. It's our approach to how we do carbon pricing, which we've been doing, incidentally, since 2007. So other jurisdictions have followed us, sometimes by decades, and we have to work collaboratively with the federal government. That's why that is part and parcel in the agreement that will come to a stringency agreement and figure out what the top rate would be. We want to have a balance of making sure that it's going to support the investment in carbon capture technology, but also not be punitive to our industry so that we have the ability to invest in those things. So I think that's what it's about when you have an agreement. There are certain commitments and undertakings we have to do, and there's certain commitments and undertakings that the federal government has to do. But I was very pleased to see that they've made great movement on the lion's share of the 9 bad laws that we put on the table.
I will say, like, you're saying carbon price floor is okay from the federal government. You weren't saying that for a lot of years. That is a very different position that you're taking now because it appears to benefit other projects. Will you keep the increase, the 6-fold increase the Prime Minister just described when it comes to the industrial carbon price, even if another bitumen pipeline doesn't go ahead?
Well, I think, again, that's not true, Vashi. We had a tier agreement before I came in that agreed that we would increase the price on CO2 for industrial emitters up to $170 per ton by 2030. We paused it this year because with the changes that we've seen in the world, the disruption in energy markets, we knew that price going that high that quickly was going to be harmful to our industry. And now we're in a negotiation with the Prime Minister about what that is going to look like. So I hope we can come to an agreement where we've identified April 1st as a time for when we're going to announce what that agreement would look like. There's going to be some more negotiations that have to take place, but that's part of what happens when Canada and Alberta work together. I think we both benefit. Not everybody gets 100% of what they want, but I can tell you that we certainly moved the dial on many of the things that we did want to start getting investment from the private sector back into our province again.
The Prime Minister just said that the industrial carbon price would increase, the effective, I think he said, rate of it by sixfold. I just want to be clear, well, I'll ask the question again, Premier. If, in fact, a bitumen pipeline does not go ahead to the West Coast, will you still agree to increase the industrial price on carbon as it applies to your province?
Well, as I said, it's a negotiation. I don't think if you look at the agreement, it doesn't talk about $1,000 carbon price in the agreement. It talks about $130 carbon price, and that's where what we're looking at. So I would say that we have an agreement in place. We've got some parameters that we've put in there. There is no veto for any province. There is some acknowledgement that the price has to go up, but there's also an acknowledgement that that's going to be a negotiation. I'm looking forward to that.
Is it contingent on a pipeline going ahead in your view?
Well, I think what you've seen in the agreement is that the Pathways project going ahead is contingent on a pipeline to the Asian markets going ahead, and vice versa. The pipeline has to go ahead for Pathways to go ahead as well, and we're going to work on stage gating both of those things so they happen at the same time.
I didn't mean the Pathways, my apologies. I mean the industrial price on carbon.
We've always had an industrial price on carbon since 2007.
The increase, apologies, the increase, Premier.
Well, as I said, we're going to be negotiating that on April the 1st. We have to make sure it's at a level that is going to continue to keep our projects and our market competitive. You have to remember that in the rest of the world, most of the countries have a target of 2050. So I was pleased to see that we've moved to that same target of 2050 without having any interim targets. China, I believe, has a 2060 target. India has a 2070 target. And that, I think, is more in keeping with the idea that we have to give industry enough time to be able to invest and develop the technologies in order to make that achievable. But yes, there's an acceptance that we know $95 is not where it's going to stay, and that it is going to rise. But the level that it's going to rise, how quickly, and to what level, that remains a subject of negotiation that we'll have with Canada in due course, and hopefully have an announcement on April the 1st.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. A pleasure as always, Premier. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Vashi.
Thanks. Danielle Smith is the Premier of Alberta.
Okay, we're going to call it there. We've got a little bit of a break until question period. Yeah, but I'm sorry for making us tune into that committee this morning. I thought it was going to be a little bit more interesting than it was. But, I mean, we had other news come up, so we switched over. And, I mean, I would have watched this stuff anyway, so it's great to have you guys live with me in the chat, and we can all chat about it. I see some people are having some...
we're going to leave our special coverage.
Some differences of opinion on whether or not, Danielle is getting fooled or whatever. I personally think she got a lot of what she wanted. The issue is just, is Carney going to pull the wool over her eyes? We'll need to see how it plays out in the coming months. But I think she got a lot of what she wanted, so we'll see. I put the link in chat already. Question period there. There's the link. Just a little over half an hour, so we've got a bit of a break. And we'll see you guys there. Thank you, Gordon, for the 10 gifted. And thank you, Wanda, for the super chat. I really appreciate you guys and everybody tuning in and watching. And I will see you guys shortly. We've also got committee on after, which will be really good. We've got, after question period, we've got Anita and Non in the Foreign Affairs Committee for an hour. And then in the second hour, we're going to switch over to OGO, where another Liberal minister is going to be in. And we'll have 2 hours of Liberal ministers getting roasted. So there's the question period link again. I will see you guys shortly. And yeah, no Carney, obviously, because he's in Calgary. So We will just have Pierre and some Liberal ministers for question period. Cheers, guys. See you soon.
Fait